Hey friends, tonight, let's explore the warm, crunchy, deeply questionable world of medieval junk food. You're standing in a muddy market lane, with your nose full of charcoal and pickled onions, watching a vendor fan the flames beneath a row of, yes, mice, skewered, roasting, tails still attached. If you're wondering whether you're about to dream about this, you are, and you might not survive emotionally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is thick with the kind of smoky sweetness that only comes from old wood and even older meat. A pot-bellied man in a linen apron turns his little roasting spit, humming something vaguely offensive. His mice, 6 of them, are seasoned with garlic peel stale beer and what he calls merchant salt. You decide not to ask what that is. This is not the exotic cuisine of palaces. This is peasant-level practical eating. Mice, especially in rural England and parts of France, were a common nuisance and a convenient protein. Caught in traps near the grain silos or under the floorboards of taverns, they were easy to clean, easy to roast, and if you had a lot of ale, surprisingly, okay to chew. Tonight's historical fact, roasted dormice, were a delicacy in ancient Rome, and that habit lingered quietly through medieval Europe, particularly in back alley food stalls and border villages. While nobles turned their noses up, common folk knew a mouse roasted over embers beat another night of sour cabbage stew. You crouch beside a group of children, sitting cross-legged on a wool sack. One of them gnaws on a crispy mouse like it's the most normal thing in the world. Another offers you a bite. You politely decline, for now. The vendor, whose name might be Bert, or might be Frogman, it's unclear, reaches behind a basket and pulls out a dried mouse jerky, the to-go version, wrapped in old parchment and tied with a string of braided grass. He winks. You instantly feel less hungry. But here's the quirky detail. In some parts of rural Wales, it was believed that eating a mouse's tail would protect you from being hexed by a shepherd's wife. Not a wizard, not a witch. A shepherd's wife. Apparently, they were feared far more. Makes you wonder what kind of marriage customs were happening out there in the pastures. And just to stir a scholarly debate, you didn't ask, for some historians argue that these mouse-based snacks weren't as widespread as legends suggest. They think tales of mouse feasts were exaggerations by chroniclers who wanted to mock rural folk. Others say the sheer number of mouse bones in archaeological middens near old marketplaces proves otherwise. So who's right, the bones or the gossip? You walk past the mouse stand, nose still tingling, and head into the shaded part of the market. Someone nearby is selling onion tarts with a single sardine pressed in the middle like a bad joke. Another hawker waves a string of dried fish eyes like beads. Compared to that, the mouse guy suddenly feels gourmet. As the sun dips lower, you catch a glimpse of another roast setup. This time, a traveling cook from Brittany, with skewers of lizard and frog legs sizzling side by side. He's arguing with a merchant over how many garlic skins make a proper crust. You pretend to inspect a jar of mustard seeds while eavesdropping with deep commitment. Your stomach growls confused and possibly offended. You return to the mouse vendor out of sheer curiosity. This time, he offers a market combo. 2 mice, a strip of cheese leather, and a stale fig. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Bestseller. Eventually, you give in. One cautious bite. It's smoky, crunchy. Not unlike a burnt chicken wing, if the wing were half the size and came with whiskers. You chew slowly, as if your brain is trying to keep up with your mouth's decisions. The kids cheer. One of them burps the alphabet. Later that evening, you find yourself lying beneath a cloth awning with a full belly and a deeply conflicted soul. The firelight flickers across the stall rows, casting mouse-sized shadows on the canvas above. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the market, winding down footsteps, laughter a lute in the distance, and someone coughing dramatically after biting into a pickle wrapped in bacon grease. 3 final thoughts drift across your mind as sleep pulls you in. Maybe you are brave enough to try market mice, but only once. Medieval seasoning might just be whatever fell on the floor and smelled decent. That wasn't salt. That was definitely sand. Probably holy sand. Let's go with that. Pocket birds and salt. You're standing next to a woman in a feathered bonnet who has absolutely no patience for your wide-eyed wonder. She lifts a cloth flap on her apron and pulls out a bird. Cooked, salted, small enough to fit in her palm. She bites the wing like it's a biscuit and continues arguing with a fishmonger about eel prices. Welcome to the snack culture of songbirds, bite-sized delicacies that flutter their way into purses, pockets, and pouches across medieval Europe. Just around the corner, a boy is tossing roasted sparrows to a barking dog, laughing like he's got 3 more birds tucked under his sleeve. And he probably does. Because in many regions from Gascony to Galicia, these tiny birds were not just hunted for supper, they were finger food. Salted, smoked, stuffed in linen and chewed between church bells. You wander deeper into the square, where 3 older men are hunched over a game of dice. Each time one loses a round, he has to give up a bird from his bird sack, a worn pouch that jingles suspiciously like it contains both food and small rocks. One man has a method. He squeezes lemon from a rare preserved jar onto the bird's chest, mumbles something about love potions, and devours it whole. He doesn't win often, but he's clearly not losing in life. Tonight's historical fact. In many parts of medieval southern Europe, birds like lark, starlings, and sparrows were not only trapped in vast numbers, but also preserved with coarse salt and dried herbs to become a kind of high-protein jerky. Especially in times of fasting or travel, these portable birds became reliable companions, protein-rich, pocket-sized, and morally ambiguous. Because here's the odd twist, these birds were sometimes eaten whole, bones, beaks, and all. The idea being, if you're poor and your food is feathered, waste not. Some accounts suggest villagers considered the crackling crunch a sign of good roasting. Others may have just quietly spit out the heads behind a haystack. You pass a traveling musician tuning a lute with one hand and gnawing on a quail drumstick with the other. His case smells like thyme and roasted fat. A small boy offers you a boiled wren in exchange for a song request. You politely decline and wonder if you should have just brought almonds. But here comes the quirk. In certain areas, especially northern Italy, dried songbirds were carried in embroidered pouches, tied to belts, not for fashion, but as edible tokens of status. Think of it as the 13th century equivalent of carrying artisanal beef jerky in a monogrammed Ziploc. Of course, there's a scholarly quarrel here. Some argue that mass bird snacking was limited to specific regions with unique hunting laws. Others claim that if we trust the tax records, and who doesn't want to do that in their dreams, songbirds were traded widely, from fairs to monasteries, often in bundles of 12, wrapped like feathery cigars. You stop by a stall, run by a woman who calls herself Lady Nest. Her wares: tiny roasted birds on sticks dipped in saltwater brine and bundled like bouquets. She offers a free sample, a tiny finch skewered with rosemary. You chew thoughtfully, the flavor oddly intense for something that once weighed less than a spoonful of sugar. Suddenly, a child next to you sneezes and accidentally launches his half-eaten lark onto the cobblestones. A dog retrieves it. History repeats itself. You're offered a bundle to go the 3 wrens, 2 sparrows, and a pinch of merchant's ash, a grayish powder that smells like thyme, regret, and very old garlic. You buy it, not because you want to, but because it's starting to feel weird not to be carrying cooked birds in your coat pocket. As you wander towards the edge of the market, you find a stone bench and sit watching dusk settle on the roof tiles like a lazy curtain. Somewhere nearby, someone is frying a batch of birds in old wine and onions. It smells, actually, kind of good. Three mildly disturbing reflections flutter through your mind. You never thought you'd describe a bird as chewy, but charming. And yet here we are. Salted birds in a pocket sound like a medieval trail mix if the trail was anxiety. If you wake up tomorrow craving sparrow jerky, you're not allowed to tell anyone. Snails with butter. Regret? You're crouched in a garden that smells like wet parsley and mild despair. There's a clay pot on the fire, bubbling ominously, and next to it sits a basket of snails. Not in a cute storybook kind of way. These snails are large, slightly angry looking, and making an unfortunate squelching sound as they try to climb out of their temporary prison. You've been told not to name them. It'll only make things worse. Welcome to one of medieval Europe's slipperiest snacks, the humble garden snail served with browned butter, a dash of herbs, and a whisper of questionable decisions. A woman in a patched apron squats beside the pot. Her name is Bertha, or something similarly earthy. She picks a snail, gives it a little poke, and drops it into the boiling mix with a look of bored precision. Behind her, a gaggle of children wait impatiently, with small clay cups lined in wax paper. Yes, these snails are to-go friendly. No, you're not dreaming. Yet, tonight's historical fact in parts of France, Italy, and even southwestern Germany, snails were not only considered a delicacy, but also a fasting-friendly food, because according to certain monastic loopholes, they counted as neither fish nor meat. The church said, technically they were watery, and if it was watery, it was fair game. And yes, people ate them by the dozens. Some monasteries kept snail gardens, lovingly tended pens filled with lettuce ash and moist soil to ensure a steady supply. They called it heaven's protein, which sounds like an exaggeration, until you remember this is the same world that deep-fried frogs and called it penance. You watch as Bertha ladles out a portion into a little bowl, plops a hunk of stale bread on top, and hands it to a child who immediately begins sucking one out of its shell, like he's sipping a tiny trumpet. It makes a noise you'll try hard to forget. Then comes the smell. Butter herbs a hint of garlic and something smoky that might be moss or might be last week's firewood. It's oddly pleasant. You find yourself intrigued. One of the snails twitches. So do you. Bertha turns to you and raises a brow. First time, you nod. She chuckles and hands you a bowl. Eat fast. They're better hot and worse if you ask what part you're chewing. You take a bite. It's soft, chewy, and incredibly rich, like a mushroom got married to a rubber band and dipped itself in garlic perfume. It's not bad. It's also not necessarily good, but it's something. Now, for the quirky detail, in some medieval towns, snails were sold by weight, not count, but since they're mostly shell people, started stuffing herbs into the shell to bump up the weight. This created what modern foodies might call flavor bombs, and what medieval tax collectors called fraud. You move closer to the fire, warming your hands and your newly confused appetite. A man next to you mumbles a prayer over his bowl of snails. It sounds like gratitude and a mild apology to whatever creature he just slurped. Nearby, two monks argue softly about whether snails should be counted as land or sea creatures. One insists they are blessed amphibians of divine loophole. The other says they're just garden meat with commitment issues. Scholars are still debating this. A breeze blows through the herb garden, and the fire crackles in reply. You set your bowl down and watch a black cat swipe a snail off the edge. It seems pleased. The snail does not. Bertha returns with a second ladleful, this time topped with crumbled breadcrumbs and what looks like dried sage. You politely decline, claiming emotional fullness. Three slow thoughts ooze through your mind. Snails are the only snack that make eye contact while being cooked. Garlic covers many sins, but not all. You're not sure if you feel full or just morally tired. Sugar-spun spiders. You're perched on the edge of a worn wooden bench at the outskirts of a village fair. It's twilight. Children run past with ribbons in their hair and something on sticks in their hands. You squint. It's not candied apples, not meat pies, not even roasted chestnuts. It's spiders. Yes, legs curled, glossy, deep fried, dusted in what looks suspiciously like sugar. You blink once, then again. One of the children licks his treat and skips away like it's perfectly normal to snack on a tarantula, dipped in honey glaze. You suddenly feel very aware of your own teeth. A wiry old man with a cart nearby waves you over. His stand is decorated with woven web patterns, some made of string, some possibly not. He lifts a lid to reveal rows of shiny curled-up spiders, laid out neatly like sugared pastries. He's even got a sign, sweet-legged luck 2 pence, or 1 secret. You step closer. The air smells like fried dough, burnt wood, and something else. Something ancient. The man grins and drops a spider into a bubbling pot of oil, then rolls it in a shallow bowl of brown sugar and crushed herbs. The result? A glistening caramelized snack with too many legs and way too much confidence. Tonight's historical fact. While it's debated whether medieval Europeans actually consumed spiders as regular food, there are accounts in alpine regions and parts of Eastern Europe where spiders were used symbolically in rituals, sometimes even prepared for festive events, especially during solstice or seasonal purifications. Some records suggest the largest species were fried and eaten to absorb luck or ward off malice, depending on how your year was going. You're handed one. It's warm, crispy, surprisingly light. The sugar glaze gives it an almost festive sheen, like something that should be hanging from a tree, not being eaten beneath it. With the world watching, or at least the squirrel beside you, you take a bite. It's not horrible. The sugar hits first comforting. Then the texture arrives hollow, crispy, and faintly nutty. You chew slowly, trying not to picture legs, or eyes, or revenge. The vendor claps. A small child cheers. You swallow with dignity you did not know you had. And now, the quirky twist in some Slavic folk tales, the spider is seen as a messenger of winter eating. One was believed to bring visions or dreams of the future, so naturally they were dipped in honey and given during winter fairs. Think of it as a fortune cookie with more crunch and fewer riddles. Of course, there's a historical argument about this. Some scholars claim the stories are allegorical and no one actually ate spiders, that it was symbolic. Others point out recipes written in early herbal codices that include forest catchlings boiled in milk or baked into bread, which some believe were spiders, others insist were just badly named mushrooms. Either way, the result probably tasted the same, mysterious. Back in the square, the spider vendor starts juggling 3 candied specimens while reciting a rhyming spell. It's part performance, part sales pitch. Children giggle, a goose honks somewhere in the background, a donkey chews on a hat. Everything feels mildly unhinged in the most charming way. A man in a feathered cape tries to buy an entire tray, but is refused. Only 1 per soul, the vendor insists, or luck gets greedy. You take a moment to appreciate that sentence for how completely normal it sounds here. You decide not to go for a second bite. Not because it was bad, but because you're not ready for a dream about arachnid ancestors giving financial advice. As the fair begins to quiet, you walk past the fire pits toward the river, cradling a cup of mold, something to rinse the memory. Behind you, the vendor whistles a tune that sounds suspiciously like 8-legged footsteps. 3 sticky thoughts crawl across your brain before sleep creeps in. You've officially eaten something with more legs than friends. Sugar makes almost anything edible. Almost. If a spider visits you in your dreams tonight, ask for lottery numbers. Eel strings for kids. You're standing by the bank of a lazy river where the reeds wave like they've got nothing better to do. A small boy in patched trousers is crouched beside a bucket, threading something slippery onto a thin piece of twine. At first, you assume it's worms. Classic kid behavior. But then, he lifts the twine, grinning with all the confidence of someone about to change your worldview, and you realize those are baby eels, salted, dried, and he's making a necklace, not to wear, to eat. Welcome to medieval riverside snacks where children chewed on eel strings like licorice and nobody blinked because sugar was expensive and eels were technically everywhere. Behind the boy, a woman tends to a fire pit. She's stirring a pot of something fishy both in smell and in moral clarity while humming a lullaby that probably once doubled as a warning. Next to her, strips of eel hang drying in the sun, swaying in the breeze like greasy streamers. Tonight's historical fact: baby eels, also known as elvers, were once a widespread staple in parts of England, the Low Countries, and coastal France. These tiny creatures swarmed up rivers in spring and were scooped in baskets by the thousands. While adults smoked or stewed them, kids often got the smallest ones, which were salted, sun-dried, and tied into chewy loops for snacking. Think jerky, but slippery. Boy beside you bites off one end and starts chewing casually, offering you the other half. You accept with the grim politeness of someone who's already eaten a spider this week. It's salty, intensely so. Chewy, with a slight oily finish and the distant memory of mud. But it's filling. And for a hungry village child, that's better than a prayer, and twice as portable. You wander through the shallows watching kids skip stones, while occasionally popping eel bits into their mouths like trail mix. One girl has a bracelet made of them. Another wears hers like a crown. Fashion was different back then, especially when it was edible. Here's your quirky detail. Eel strings were sometimes dyed with crushed beetroot or elderberries to make them more fun early attempts at medieval marketing. One merchant even claimed they made children smarter. No one believed him, but he sold out weekly. Of course, there's disagreement among historians. Some believe eel snacks were more myth than meal exaggerated in folklore. Others point to archaeological finds of tiny fish bones near hearths in poor households, suggesting daily consumption. A few radical scholars even argue eel jewelry was part of seasonal rituals, but honestly, that might just be academic wishful thinking. You pass an elderly man sitting on a log, threading his own eel string. He offers you a longer piece, 3 loops salted with a twist of mint leaf in the middle. It's surprisingly refreshing. He says he once wore this exact snack into a village dance and wooed a baker's daughter with it. You nod, partly in admiration, mostly because your jaw is busy chewing. As the sun dips low, the air fills with the mixed scents of riverbank mud, dried herbs, and fish smoke. A mother calls out for her children to come wash before supper. One of them shouts, "I already ate," while waving his eel string bracelet in triumph. You sit on a flat rock, watching water bugs zip across the surface. A frog glares at you like it's jealous of your snack, or maybe just judging your life choices. 3 eel-flavored thoughts slither into your sleepy mind. Jewelry you can eat is either genius or deeply confusing. You will never again underestimate the chewing power of a 10-year-old. If you dream of necklaces that smell like rivers, don't wear them twice. Ginger fried frogs. You're standing on a patch of uneven grass behind a stone manor where the cook fires burn hotter than any gossip inside. A group of servants gathers around a low iron pan balanced over an open flame. Something sizzles. It smells like ginger old butter and opportunity. You lean closer. It's frogs. More specifically, small, crispy frogs, fried in ginger and fat, and piled high on a wooden tray. like they're auditioning for a savory fairy tale. One of the cook's sleeves rolled to the elbows, and voice thick with pride tosses another handful into the bubbling oil. The legs curl instantly crisping like chips. You flinch. The woman beside you laughs and hands you a pinch of powdered ginger from a small linen pouch. Sprinkle it while they're hot, she says. That's the secret. Tonight's historical fact. In parts of medieval France, the Low Countries, and even southern England, frogs, particularly pond frogs, were a readily available protein source. They were often foraged by children or servants, and when food was scarce or fasting laws flexible, they became a quiet, oily indulgence. Ginger, expensive but prized, was sometimes added in small pinches to elevate humble ingredients into something almost festive. A boy tosses you a cooked leg. It's warm, browned at the edges, and glistening with rendered duck fat. You hesitate. He grins with a gap in his teeth. Better than stew? He insists. You believe him instantly. You bite. The texture's a mix of crunchy skin and a soft center that's oddly like chicken. If chicken had once been a ballerina. The ginger hits neck sharp warm and just enough to distract you from the fact that you're casually eating pond life. A group of girls sitting nearby play a game of who can eat the most without wiping their hands. The winner gets the prize frog, which is slightly larger and dusted with crushed herbs. One of them burps, then bows. You clap politely. Here comes the quirky twist in some medieval kitchens. Ginger-fried frogs were considered a betwixt food, not fancy enough for noble tables, not rough enough to be just peasant fare. They occupied a strange middle class of snacks, sometimes served to traveling clergy or minor officials. Enough to impress, not enough to count as excess. And naturally, there's debate. Some scholars claim frogs were only eaten in times of desperation or penance. Others say certain regions turned them into delicacies, especially when paired with rare spices. One 14th century cookbook lists green legs and fire butter as a banquet starter, believed to be frog legs, sautéed in herb-infused ghee. Historians still argue whether that was literal or poetic. Most agree it was probably both. You move toward the fire, where a cook is making little frog packets, legs wrapped in cabbage leaves dipped in egg and fried again. Someone behind you calls this the double crisp. A monk passing by mutters something about temptation and takes two. The tray is almost empty now, but one small leg remains curled like a tiny violin string. You take it, sprinkle the last of the ginger dust on top, and eat slowly, savoring the warmth and weirdness. Across the lawn, the manor's hounds bark at a flock of geese who seem profoundly unimpressed. A girl chases a goat through the herb garden. Somewhere, a lute starts playing a tune, so off-key it could boil milk. But here, by the fire, it's peaceful. The cooks settle down, passing around mugs of watered ale and licking ginger from their fingers. You lean back against a low stone wall, belly full heart, weirdly content. 3 oddly satisfying thoughts hop into your brain as night begins to stretch across the sky. Ginger makes frogs taste like victory. You might never trust a quiet pond again. There's something strangely dignified about snacks that can jump. Monk's Pocket Fish. You're walking along a dusty road lined with yarrow and crushed thyme, just behind a small group of monks, moving with the kind of purposeful slowness that says we'll get there eventually, but only if God wills it, and we don't run out of dried fish. Their robes flap gently in the breeze, and one of them, older hood, half-cocked eyes like he's seen too many pilgrimages and not enough naps. Pauses to reach into his sleeve. Out comes a fish. Not fresh, not wet. This one's small, flat cured, and smells like salted parchment. He breaks it in half, mutters a short blessing that might be grace, or might be please don't chip my tooth, and hands you a piece. You're officially inducted into the quiet world of medieval monk snacks. Tonight's historical fact: monks, especially those on foot, or traveling between abbeys, often carried pocket-sized dried fish as sustenance. These weren't gourmet meals. They were survival rations, with the added benefit of keeping your hands busy and your jaw stronger. Salted anchovies smelt, or river minnows were common, cured to near indestructibility, and often wrapped in cloth or leaves then tucked into sleeves belts or even hollowed out book satchels. You chew cautiously. It's tough, salty, tastes like a tide pool and slightly of forgiveness. The monk beside you nods solemnly. Best eaten with prayer, or at least some wine. He pulls out a tiny gourd flask and offers you a sip. It's thin, herby, and tastes like fermented secrets. You pretend to enjoy it. He pretends not to notice. You continue walking. The rhythm of the journey is gentle. The sound of sandals on gravel, the occasional snort from a mule, and the soft crackle of someone pulling apart another fish from their pocket. You notice something curious. Each monk has a different fish strategy. One wraps his in cloth, soaked with rosemary to keep it soft. Another bites through like he's training for something brutal. A younger one crumbles his overbread, like medieval trail mix. Here's your quirky twist. Some abbeys were known to season their pocket fish with dried lavender, not for taste, but to hide the smell, especially when traveling through towns with strict food laws during fasting periods. A monk carrying herb fish could claim it was for medicine or charity. Others sneakier soaked their fish in beer to rehydrate it mid-walk. Practical and slightly rebellious. Of course, not everyone agrees on the historical scope of this habit. Some scholars say pocket fish were rare, reserved for elite monks with provisioning privileges. Others believe they were as common as wool hoods and silent disapproval. Archaeological digs near old pilgrim routes have unearthed tiny fish bones buried in clusters, suggesting communal snacking was not just real, but spiritual. You pause beneath a willow tree where the monks settle for a short rest. One of them pulls out a flat wooden box. Inside, 3 smoked minnows, a piece of black bread, and a dried apple slice. It's a monk's Lunchable, and it's got more variety than you expected. You sit quietly, nibbling on the remaining fish bit. It's grown on you, like devotion or guilt. The older monk leans toward you and whispers, "We once traded fish for parchment. Fair deal. We were out of ink." You nod, uncertain whether to laugh or confess. As the group rises and begins their quiet trudge again, you follow behind, heart oddly warmed by the simplicity. The road ahead is long, but your steps feel lighter. Maybe it's the salt. Maybe it's the silence. Or maybe it's just nice to choose something without needing a recipe. 3 peaceful thoughts drift through your contemplative mind. Dried fish makes surprisingly good company. Monks might have invented protein snacks before anyone realized it. If you carry food in your sleeve, it better be blessed, or at least wrapped tightly. Caterpillars in grain coats. You're sitting near the edge of a blacksmith's yard on a bench that's half ash, half hope, and fully questionable. The forge hisses behind you like it's annoyed to be awake. Every so often, sparks flit through the air like angry fireflies. And in the middle of all this heat noise and iron-scented chaos, someone is cooking. Not bread, not meat, something smaller, something squirmier. You watch a young apprentice squat by a flat stone, rolling what looks like fat caterpillars and crushed grain. He lines them up on a metal tray, dusts them with salt and dried nettle, and slides the whole thing into a side pit where the coals glow dull and dangerous. Welcome to snack hour for the medieval working class. Tonight's historical fact: edible insects, including caterpillars, beetle grubs, and larvae, were sometimes consumed by laborers and rural folk in times of scarcity, but also occasionally as novelty snacks, especially by blacksmiths and charcoal burners who worked near the forest edge. Rolled in grain or crushed bread, these little creatures provided bursts of fat and protein in a world where both were hard to come by. The caterpillars sizzle gently. The apprentice grins as he flips them with the edge of a knife blade. They're turning golden now, slightly puffed. He pulls one out and bites it straight from the tray. Crunchy on the outside, warm on the inside, he says, like that explains anything. You're handed one. You hesitate, but it smells like roasted sunflower seeds and earthy toast. You bite. The outside is crisp, the inside soft and a little nutty. Not unpleasant, not great, just confusing in a way that feels deeply nutritional. Beside you, a smith named Hal leans over and grabs 3 at once. He chews with the enthusiasm of a man who's eaten worse. Keeps your arms strong, he says, flexing. Also good for the teeth. You're not convinced about the second part. Here's your quirky detail in some forest communities. Children would collect caterpillars specifically for this purpose, usually fat green ones found on cabbage or nettle plants. They'd be rewarded with honeyed oats or bits of cheese in exchange. A kind of early food barter system powered by bugs and hope. And of course, here comes the scholarly argument. Some researchers believe the idea of eating caterpillars is mostly misunderstood folklore, exaggerated by townfolk mocking rural diets. Others point to preserved cooking stones, charred insect remains, and written mentions in obscure 13th century herbal guides as proof that this wasn't just myth, but lunch. You nibble another. The salt helps. The texture grows on you. One of the apprentices dips his in beer and claims it's better than stew. Another girl says it tastes like crunchy cheese if you close your eyes hard enough. You try. She's not entirely wrong. A small basket near the forge holds fresh caterpillars nestled in cabbage leaves. You suddenly feel like you're part of a secret club you never meant to join. A loud clang rings out from the forge as Hal returns to work now, belching faintly beetle-scented smoke. You look around. Everyone is eating. No one is complaining. And somehow, in this odd moment, you realize how adaptable people are, even in centuries past. When meat is rare and lunch breaks are short, you roll your protein and grain and make it work. As twilight deepens, you lean against the side of the shed. The air is thick with iron and nettles. The tray is nearly empty. One last grain-coated caterpillar lies on the edge, perfectly roasted, glistening in the forge's glow. You let it be. 3 chewy thoughts squirm through your brain as your eyes begin to close. Caterpillars and grain coats are basically medieval protein bars if you don't think too hard about it. Forge snacks should not involve anything that once had legs. If it crunches like cereal and you're still alive, it counts as food. Chili bat, jerky. You're in the shadow of a rocky hillside village where the wind doesn't just blow. It whistles through cracks in the stone like it's got old secrets to tell. Somewhere nearby, a goat is complaining loudly about life. You step into a low wooden shack with smoke curling out through holes in the roof and a smell that can only be described as fermented adventure. Inside, several strips of something leathery hang from a twine line. They're brown, curled, glazed with red speckles, and just enough mystery to make your nostrils twitch. It's bat jerky. Not metaphorical, not bat-shaped. Actual bats. Wings removed, bodies flattened, marinated in brine and wild chili, then sun-dried on woven mats until chewy, spicy, and deeply medieval. A man with a nose like a hawk and the permanent squint of someone who's dried a lot of things invites you to sit. He hands you a strip still warm from the drying shelf. Cave bat, he says proudly, caught at dawn, fed on figs. You nod slowly, the way you do when someone offers you something and also seems like the type to eat your boots if offended. Tonight's historical fact. In remote parts of southern Europe and the Mediterranean hills, small bat species were occasionally caught and consumed not as everyday meat, but as preserved snacks or medicinal tonics. Though rare in documentation, a few 13th to 15th century herbal and culinary texts mention winged night creature, dried in salt, and herbs used in winter as a warmth-restoring ration. Modern scholars mostly agree it was bat. Probably. You take a bite, it's chewy. Tough in places with a sudden burst of spice that hits the back of your throat like a small peppery slap. The texture is somewhere between overcooked duck and survival. You chew carefully. An old woman in the corner watches you approvingly. She's knitting something that may or may not be for a bat. She raises her mug in salute. You raise your jerky back, because at this point, that's who you are now. And here's your quirky detail. The chilies used in the marinade weren't native. They were rare and traded in small amounts, sometimes mistaken for dragon pods. Villagers believed that drying meat in these spicy mixtures kept away not only rot, but also night fevers and shadow spirits. So yes, spicy bat was both a snack and spiritual armor. Efficient. You glance at the other meats hanging nearby. A boy walks by and points. Don't eat the ones that look too smooth, he whispers. Those were caught during full moon. Bad luck. You stare at your piece. It's very wrinkly. You relax. The shack keeper tells you of a traveling knight who once bought an entire bundle of bat jerky for a siege, said it kept him awake, alert, and unpopular. Apparently, bat breath was real. Naturally, scholars argue about the truth behind these dried wing snacks. Some say it was folklore. Others say poor documentation. A few skeptical researchers insist the bat was likely a mistranslation for pipistrelle or shadowbird. But the bones found in certain hilltop middens disagree. Tiny skulls, hollow femurs, lots of little teeth. You're offered a second piece, this one thinner, crispier, with a smoky aftertaste. Against your better judgment, you accept. It's better somehow. Maybe your palate has surrendered. Maybe you're becoming medieval. Outside, a boy plays a flute made of bone. A dog chases something that might have been a very fast rabbit or a very low-flying bat. The sunset spills across the stones like honey on ash. You sit quietly and finish the last bite. 3 spicy thoughts flap into your mind as night settles over the ridge. Bats apparently taste like intensity and stubborn decisions. Medieval jerky came with a warning label. In riddles. If you ever dream of flying tonight, check if you're also hanging upside down. Campfire quail eggs. You're tucked beside a smoky fire pit under a sky the color of boiled linen. Around you, a circle of cloaked figures laugh poke sticks into glowing embers and pop something small and golden into their mouths with the air of people who figured life out. You shuffle closer, lured by the scent, earthy rich, with a hint of smoke and something vaguely eggy. On a flat stone, just above the coals, dozens of tiny eggs sizzle. Some are browning at the edges, others still soft and glossy. One of the travelers, a wiry girl with soot on her nose and a feather stuck in her bootlaces, motions for you to sit. She hands you a warm bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, 4 roasted quail eggs, gently cracked open, sprinkled with salt and crushed fennel. Congratulations. You've stumbled into the most satisfying snack circle in the medieval woods. Tonight's historical fact: quail eggs, small protein, rich, and surprisingly durable, were a favorite among traveling hunters, scouts, and camp cooks. In medieval Europe, particularly in forested regions of Germany and France, quail were common game birds. Their eggs were easy to collect, carry, and roast over open fires, especially when wrapped in leaves or set on hot stones. Some camps even seasoned them with foraged herbs or a pinch of ash salt to add flavor. You bite into one. It's warm, soft in the middle, with a yolk that tastes like sunlight filtered through moss. It's simple, honest, perfect. Another traveler flips a batch of eggs with a stick, carefully rolling them to avoid burning. A boy beside you boasts he can eat a dozen in one go. He tries. He makes it to 9 before tipping over. in what might be glory or indigestion. Someone else offers you the fancy one, a quail egg that's been soaked in mead before roasting. You try it. It's sweet, smoky, and carries the faint aftertaste of someone else's poetry. You nod approvingly. The group nods back. You are now part of the circle. Here's your quirky detail. Quail eggs were sometimes traded between villages as tokens of friendship or flirtation. Wrapped in ribboned grass or tucked inside carved wooden boxes, they were given with a wink and a warning. Don't break it, or the luck breaks too. One noblewoman allegedly sent a basket of 12 eggs, each dyed with natural pigments, to her secret lover one for every day he missed mass. Of course, some historians argue quail eggs were too fragile to be used widely by commoners. But others point to preserved shell fragments in rural hearth sites and written mentions in cook scrolls of forest eggs quick roasted for guests of standing but poor company. Make of that what you will. The fire pops. Someone tosses in a sprig of rosemary. Another egg cracks slightly and steams dramatically. A man with 3 teeth and 7 stories begins reciting a poem about a quail that got lost in a chapel. No one knows if it's true. No one cares. You eat another, and another. The heat, the taste, the night it all blends into a kind of edible lullaby. For a moment you forget you've eaten spider's eels and probably your daily salt quota 3 times over. This is comfort food, small enough to hold, big enough to remember. 3 soft thoughts roll into your mind as your fingers brush the last warm shell. Quail eggs are proof that joy sometimes comes in bite-sized servings. If a stranger offers you one over a fire, say yes, it's rarely a trap. Medieval snacks come for the protein, stay for the bonding. Grasshoppers in ash dust. You're walking along the edge of a sun-baked field where the harvest is mostly done, except for a few stray stalks of wheat, waving like they're not ready to be judged. The ground crunches beneath your boots, not with gravel, but with wings. Dry, thin, slightly unsettling wings. And somewhere, just ahead, a group of villagers are crouched in the dirt, moving with the focus of people collecting treasure. They're hunting grasshoppers. A boy snatches one mid-jump and pops it into a little linen sack tied at his belt. A woman nearby carries a basket, filled to the brim, hundreds of legs twitching faintly beneath a cloth. No one flinches. One man sneezes. That's the most drama you get. This is snack preparation, not sport. Tonight's historical fact: in many parts of medieval Europe, particularly in southern and central regions, grasshoppers were gathered during harvest time and preserved for food, often dusted in ash, roasted over low fires, or tossed with salt and herbs. They served as crunchy, protein-rich snacks that were cheap, portable, and oddly popular among field workers. This wasn't desperation food. This was functional snacking with a side of attitude. You follow the group back toward a cluster of stones where a fire has been built low, glowing under a grate covered in thin, twitchless grasshoppers. Someone stirs a pot of what looks like sand and smells like thyme and burnt bread. Ash dust, they say proudly, catches the flavor, kills the guilt. They toss a handful of the roasted insects into the pot, shake it with practiced ease, and scoop out a small bowlful for you. The grasshoppers glisten with oil, their legs curled like they're still mid-jump, frozen forever in a snack-worthy pose. You hesitate. The bowl is warm, light, smells like nutmeg and campfire. You pop one in your mouth. It crunches like autumn. slightly smoky, faintly herby. Not bad, not terrifying. Just earthy in the way that things are when they've spent their entire lives outdoors with no understanding of seasoning until now. Here's your quirky detail. Some villagers would sprinkle crushed grasshoppers over bread or porridge like medieval bacon bits. Others believed the ash coating had purifying properties, absorbing illness or unspoken sins if eaten during full moons. So yes, some folks ate grasshoppers to snack, others to cleanse the soul. Welcome to medieval multitasking. A man beside you munches loudly and says it sharpens the ears. You don't know what that means, but suddenly you can hear the fire crackle with disturbing clarity. Of course, there's disagreement among historians. Some claim grasshopper consumption was purely seasonal and limited to the poorest communities. Others argue it was a normalized, respected practice even found in certain monastic orders where meat was banned, but insects somehow weren't. A few literary references even describe sky-born crunchlings served with flatbread at seasonal fairs. Back by the fire, someone offers you the deluxe version. A roasted grasshopper dipped in honey and rolled in crushed fennel seed. You try it. It's sweet. Too sweet. You cough discreetly into your sleeve and pretend it's divine. A child offers you a lucky wing, just the wing, and says, if you keep it in your pocket, overnight, you'll have good dreams and no spider bites. You accept. Because what's one more wing in this journey of edible confusion? The sun is dipping low. The field begins to quiet. Baskets are empty now, and the fire is down to embers. A girl hums a lullaby while flicking leftover grasshopper legs into the grass. You sit back on a stone bowl, empty tongue tingling faintly with ash and herb. 3 crunchy thoughts hop through your fading awareness. You never expected to snack on something with more knees than you. Ash might be the world's oldest seasoning, and maybe the most forgiving. If you dream of jumping tonight, blame the grasshoppers or thank them. Worms and bread bits. You're sitting on a creaky wooden dock that smells like wet rope, old shoes, and decisions made in the dark. The river glides past with the slow, smug confidence of something that knows all the town's secrets. Beside you, a bucket sloshes gently. Inside, worms, dozens of them, plump, pale, and squirming with the same energy as a tavern brawl at closing time. You assume quite reasonably that they're for fishing. You are incorrect. A boy with a chipped tooth and a grin too big for his face plucks one from the bucket and dunks it into a bowl of crumbs, hard dry bits of bread soaked in a strange yellowish broth. He rolls the worm carefully like he's battering a tiny confused sausage. Then he pops it onto a flat stone heated over a brazier. The worm cooks fast. It tightens, turns golden at the edges, and starts to smell like toast mixed with rain. He hands it to you with the casual confidence of a chef presenting his signature dish. Welcome to the fisherman's snack plate. Tonight's historical fact: in some medieval river towns, worms, especially large, soft-bodied ones, were not only used as bait, but also as emergency food for fishermen and dock workers. Mixed with breadcrumbs, herbs, and sometimes beer mash, they were pan-fried into chewy bites and eaten when rations were low or curiosity was high. They weren't glamorous, they weren't talked about, but they filled the silence between tides. You stare at the offering. It's warm, smells like nutty bread and wet autumn. You chew. It's fine. No, really. The texture is like overcooked pasta, and the breadcrumb coating helps. You've had worse. Remember the bat? The old man 2 crates down laughs when you wince. First one's always the worst. Second one tastes like courage. He hands you another, this one slightly bigger, dusted with what might be dried parsley or possibly river moss. Who's to say? A girl passing by offers a dipping sauce made from mustard seed and pickle brine. For flavor, she says, you dip, you regret, you survive. Here's the quirky detail. In some fishing villages, these worm and bread bites were given fanciful names to make them more palatable: river curls, silt sausages, or in one particularly bold menu, moon threads. They were even sold outside taverns on skewers, especially during feast days when meat was banned and no one was paying close attention to what counted as clean. Naturally, historians argue over this. Some say it's a fisherman's myth, a story to prank outsiders. Others point to preserved cook notes, mentioning river gleanings rolled in loaf crumbs, and a few questionable illustrations that definitely look like a worm on toast. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was folklore, with a chewy aftertaste. You watch a group of young dockhands gather around the brazier. They swap stories, elbow each other, and eat their worm snacks without flinching. One of them swears it helps the joints. Another claims it keeps you from sleepwalking. You nod along, because at this point, why not? The sun drops behind the far hills, leaving the river glowing faintly under the rising mist. You lean back full, in the weirdest possible way, and listen to the water lap against the pilings. The bucket is empty now. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere, an owl hoots like it disapproves of everything you've eaten tonight. 3 slippery thoughts wiggle through your mind just before sleep. Worms are more filling than expected, and less judgmental than bacon. Breadcrumbs are medieval magic. They make anything snackable. If you dream in spirals tonight, it's not your brain. It's the dinner. Tiny crabs in leaf wraps. You're crouched on a flat, sun-warmed rock near the edge of a brackish tidal marsh, where the air smells like wet salt, mossy wood, and fish who died with regrets. A breeze carries the distant clang of church bells inland, but here everything is about crabs. Specifically, the very small, very fast, slightly ridiculous kind. Children dart between the reeds with woven baskets, flipping over stones and splashing through ankle-deep water. Every so often, a triumphant shout rings out someone's caught a good one. And by good, we mean snack-sized. 2 fingers, wide legs still wiggly, but just right for wrapping and roasting. Behind them, a fire crackles lazily. A woman in a sea-stained dress sits cross-legged beside it, carefully folding the crabs into parcels of broadleaf dock and knotweed. She sprinkles something onto them from a pouch: crushed peppercorn, dried orange peel, maybe just beach grit, with ambition, and sets them on hot stones to steam. You sit beside her. She offers you one without a word. The leaf is slightly charred, the crab inside curled pink by the heat, and glistening with what you can only hope is intentional oil. Tonight's historical fact in coastal villages throughout medieval Europe, especially in tidal zones like Brittany, Norfolk, and certain Italian lagoons, tiny crabs were harvested en masse during low tide. Wrapped in edible leaves and roasted over open fires, they serve as quick energy for laborers, salt workers, and kids who'd long since tired of porridge. While larger crabs were saved for markets or feast days, the littlest one is perfect snack material. You bite in. The shell gives with a soft crunch. The meat, if it can be called that, is delicate, briny, and tastes like someone whispered ocean while squeezing a lemon nearby. It's surprisingly good. Or maybe you've simply adjusted. A child plops beside you, holding up a bundle of 3. He unwraps one and dips it in a muddy bowl of vinegar and wild onion. You follow suit. The flavor jumps a bit sharp and acidic. He grins, then hiccups violently. You both laugh, like pirates. Here comes your quirky twist. Some villagers considered these crab wraps tokens of protection. Mothers would tuck one cooked obviously into a child's satchel before a journey. Sailors might eat one before boarding, believing the shell still intact acted like armor for the stomach. In one record from a Flemish fishing hamlet, lovers even exchanged crab parcels as good luck charms before long separations. You suspect they also just liked snacks. Naturally, scholars can't agree. Some say these wraps were ceremonial, linked to local harvest festivals or sea rites. Others argue they were simply the easiest way to use up surplus crabs that were too small to sell. One particularly poetic monk wrote about the leaf-bound gifts of tide and fire, which honestly sounds like he just wanted lunch without judgment. You accept a second wrap. This one has a crab missing one leg and an extra leaf tucked inside like someone got creative. It's warmer, smokier, and the char adds flavor you'll later call bold because burnt feels rude in this context. As dusk settles, more villagers join the circle, passing leaf bundles, sipping weak ale and humming coastal lullabies you can't quite follow. Someone starts stacking crab shells into a tiny tower. A dog tries to eat it. The tower wins. You lean back on your elbows, full but curious. The salt air clings to your skin. Somewhere nearby, a gull cackles, like it knows how this night ends. You ignore it and unwrap one final crab, the smallest yet, barely 2 bites. It tastes like seafoam and home. 3 tiny thoughts scuttle across your content brain. Crabs and leaves are nature's answer to medieval dumplings. If you eat something with 6 legs and still smile, you're adapting. You now believe in edible good luck charms, at least until breakfast. Bird Fat Festival. Cake. You're standing in the middle of a village square, draped in faded banners and smelling faintly of apples, ash, and triumph. Today is the final day of the winter feast, and it shows. Children run with sticky fingers, dogs steal unattended sausages, and someone is attempting to juggle 3 turnips while standing on a barrel. It's not going well. But you're not here for the turnips. You're here for the smell. A thick golden scent wafts from the far end of the square, warm, nutty, and slightly alarming. You follow it past the ale tent and the man yelling about goats with excellent teeth until you reach a table. Wooden, bowed in the middle from the weight of what can only be described as edible bricks. Festival cakes. Not the fluffy kind. Not even the sweet kind. These are dense, glistening bird fat pastries. One is shaped like a goose. Another looks vaguely like a hibernating bear. A third is just a shapeless lump, but the sign next to it says, luck-filled. You try not to overthink it. Tonight's historical fact in parts of medieval Northern and Eastern Europe, particularly across Germany, Poland, and the Baltics, animal fat was a common substitute for butter in baking, especially in poor or rural communities. Bird fat, particularly goose and pigeon, was prized for its rich texture and warmth and used in winter pastries made for festivals, solstice feasts, or pre-fasting indulgences. These cakes were often dense, high in calories, and designed to stick to your ribs, a phrase that made perfect sense once you ate one. A woman with flour on her face and feathers in her braids offers you a piece. You take it. It's warm. Heavier than expected. You bite. The crust is thin and crackly, like a burnt leaf. The inside is soft, doughy, speckled with chopped nuts and something vaguely citrus. But it's the fat that gets you that warm, rich melt on your tongue. It's not greasy exactly. More like comforting. Like someone gave you a hug made out of soup. You chew slowly. You don't want to rush this. The woman explains that her recipe uses goose fat, rendered over 3 nights, strained through linen, and mixed with rye flour, ground chestnuts, wild currants, and something she calls festival spice. You ask what's in that. She leans in and whispers, mostly cinnamon, and a pinch of daring. You nod respectfully. That seems fair? A group of teens nearby are daring each other to eat the triple-layered bear cake. One tries. He makes it halfway through and lies dramatically on the ground. Another girl breaks off a goose wing and yells, "Victory!" No one questions it. Here's your quirky detail. In certain villages, these bird fat cakes were carved into animal shapes, paraded through the town, then ceremoniously devoured as part of symbolic seasonal cleansing. Eating the pastry pig, you're letting go of greed. Biting the pastry. Owl farewell, sleepless nights. One year, a baker made a giant swan filled with smaller bird cakes. It collapsed halfway down the road, and the villagers declared it an omen. No one remembers of what. You notice a sign by the table that reads, "Cakes of courage, eat one before a journey." A child grabs one and declares he's walking to the next village. It's 3 days away. He makes it to the edge of the field before sitting down and finishing the rest. The baker hands you another slice, this one topped with rose hip powder and a drizzle of honey. It's sweeter than the first with a lingering hint of sage. She says it's her peaceful version meant for reflection rest and post-banter digestion. Now for the scholarly debate. Some historians believe bird fat cakes were originally tied to pre-Christian rituals, offerings to household spirits, winter gods, or ancestors. Others argue they were simply practical. You have bird fat, you have flour, you make something filling. The truth likely lies somewhere between ancient rites and leftover lunch. You sit on a hay bale and observe as two dogs argue over a drop pastry in the shape of a pigeon. Neither wins. A third dog walks up and takes it. Somewhere, a man starts playing a bagpipe that sounds vaguely like a goose in distress. No one seems bothered. A woman beside you hums while braiding pastry dough into small, twisted shapes she calls feather knots. She offers you one. You accept. It's chewy, slightly savory, and makes your eyebrows lift without permission. Someone brings over a barrel of spiced cider, pours it into cups made of hollowed apples, and offers them freely to anyone with cake in hand, which is at this point everyone. As dusk settles in, lanterns flicker to life, and the festival glows golden and soft. Children stack cake crusts into towers. A man tells a dramatic story about how one of these cakes once saved him from wolves. No one interrupts. Someone starts slow dancing with a pastry pig. You sip cider and chew quietly, unsure whether to laugh or write a hymn. Then you overhear an elder whispering to a young girl. You must listen when the cake is warm. That's when it speaks clearest. The girl nods, solemnly bites into her pastry bear, and says she heard it tell her not to trust ducks. She makes a good point. The warmth in your belly is no longer just from the fat. It's the laughter, the fire, the absurdity, and the realization that no one here is pretending to be anything but exactly themselves, full sticky and weirdly proud of it. You're handed a final slice. This one, shaped like a bird, mid-flight, glazed with berry syrup. You eat it slowly, trying to memorize the taste of celebration. 3 golden thoughts rise with the smoke as you lean back and watch the stars come out. Bird fat is not subtle, but it understands you. If your pastry has wings, eat it before it flies away. Festival cakes don't whisper in words, they hum in butter. Honey-Glazed Field Mice. You're standing near the long wooden tables set at the edge of a highland meadow where late autumn sun glints through low-hanging mist and the grass smells faintly of frost and secrets. It's quiet out here, just past the festival grounds, where the food gets a little wilder, both in origin and in taste. On one table rests a curious sight, a clay tray lined with what look like tiny roasted bundles. They shimmer slightly in the light. You lean closer. Tiny paws, curled tails, glazed backs, field mice, roasted, dipped in honey, dusted with herbs. You pause. A man nearby, tall, red-cheeked with the beard of someone who knows far too many animals, personally sees your hesitation and gestures warmly. Try one, he says. The glaze cuts the gamey bit. This is somehow not comforting. Tonight's historical fact: in certain parts of medieval Europe, particularly in rural Britain and central Italy, field mice were occasionally consumed, especially during feast days when the goal was to eat something special from the land. Mice were easy to trap, particularly during harvest season when they gorged on grain. When prepared properly skinned, roasted, basted with honey or fruit glaze, they were served as novelty treats at local fairs or as rustic delicacies by wealthier lords aiming to impress with eccentricity. The man picks one up, holding it delicately by the tail, and dips it into a bowl of honey spiced with wild mint and crushed juniper. Best eaten hottie notes, then bites off the top half like it's nothing more than a caramelized fig. You're handed one. It's warm, sticky, surprisingly aromatic. The tail dangles like a question mark about your life choices. You take a small bite. The skin is crisp, the meat beneath minimal. It tastes mostly of honey herbs and the lingering idea of something that once chewed through a barley sack. But you keep chewing, and then take another bite. And suddenly, it's not bad. It's bold, wild, slightly unsettling, but in a way that makes you feel oddly connected to every forager who ever tried something weird just to say they did. Around you, others eat casually. A woman sprinkles hers with smoked salt. A boy dips his in cider. An elderly man lines them up on a slice of dark bread and eats them like a tiny meat platter. A noble-looking lady with a fur-trimmed shawl uses a knife and fork because dignity is eternal. Here's your quirky detail. In one obscure feast, held in Wales in the 14th century, roasted mice were arranged in the shape of a crown and presented as a gift of harvest to a visiting bishop. According to records, he declined the dish, but his guards did not. Some versions of the tale say the bishop left early. Others say he stayed and had two. There's a scholarly squabble naturally. Some claim these accounts were exaggerated rural jokes turned into local legend. Others argue that the sheer number of mouse bones found near seasonal hearths, combined with kitchen notes from manor houses, suggest this was no joke. One bold manuscript includes a recipe for mice of honey and sage, best served in uneven number. Back at a table, someone offers you a premium version mouse, stuffed with minced apple and hazelnut before roasting. It's sophisticated. You take a cautious bite. It's sweet, soft in the middle with a crisp edge, somewhere between a tiny tart and a dare. Someone else claims they make excellent travel snacks. Lasts 3 days in a pouch, he says. 5 if it's cold. You nod. It feels like the kind of fact you'll never need, but will remember forever. The sun begins to lower behind the hills. A long shadow falls across the meadow. People begin to gather leftovers, wrapping mice in leaves or packing them in small clay jars. One girl strings 3 onto a stick like meat lollipops and skips off humming. You're handed one final piece, this time garnished with candied lavender and a single clove. You eat it slowly, more out of reflection than hunger. It's your 5th, possibly 6th. You've lost count. The line between snack and story has blurred completely. You wander toward the stone wall that marks the village's edge, your hands sticky with honey and confidence. Someone is playing a flute badly. A sheep bleats judgmentally. You stare out across the field and realize that sometimes history isn't written in ink. It's glazed in herbs and roasted over fire. 3 small thoughts scurry across your quieting mind. Mice are surprisingly expressive and apparently edible. If your food comes with a tail, it should at least be well seasoned. When in doubt, say yes to the honey and just chew fast. Ash pickled snake eggs. You're standing near the edge of an overgrown garden that once belonged to an apothecary, now mostly reclaimed by time nettle and opinionated bees. Stone paths crack beneath your feet. Clay pots line a crooked table, some sealed with wax, others left open to the breeze, and whatever choices nature decides to make. And then you see the basket. It's filled with round, dusty gray lumps the size of marbles. A woman with sleeves rolled up and hair tied in a knot of practiced irritation sees you looking. She nods at the basket like it's no big deal. Snake eggs, she says. Pickled in ash brine. They're sharper than they look. You blink. Tonight's historical fact, while there's no widespread medieval European tradition of consuming snake eggs, regularly fringe accounts and apothecary records, especially from southern Italy, Moorish Spain, and some Slavic folk practices suggest that ash-pickled reptile eggs were used both as curiosities and cures, believed to aid digestion, repel nightmares, or inspire visions depending on who you asked. They were preserved in salted ash mixed with vinegar, lemon peel, and whatever magical thinking was on hand that week. You pick one up. It's cool, slightly rough from the ash crust. The woman offers a knife bone handled, unnecessarily dramatic. You slice the egg in half. The inside is pale, soft, slightly gelatinous, with a ring of greenish yellow at its core. She sprinkles a pinch of wild salt and tells you to eat it quickly before it remembers where it came from. You chew. It's surprising, tart, smoky, slightly sulfurous, like a pickled quail egg had a complicated childhood. You swallow, nod politely, and wonder how much of your soul you just seasoned. Nearby, a man with a beard braided into cymbals eats his, with a slice of black bread and a smear of wild honey. Cuts the sting, he explains. A girl beside him dips hers in garlic oil and claims she hasn't had a bad dream in a month. Here's your quirky detail. Some ash-pickled eggs were wrapped in leaves and buried beneath floorboards overnight, before eating a practice supposedly meant to settle the chaos inside. One old tale claims if you eat one while holding your breath, you'll hear the voice of the last thing the snake saw. No one has confirmed this. No one particularly wants to. A quiet scholar sitting on a stump offers historical backup. He references a 12th century apothecary's book listing Reptilia ova as useful in dreams of birds in memory of wet seasons. He shrugs. That probably meant snake eggs and seasonal depression. Medieval Latin was dramatic. The crowd begins to gather curious now. Someone brings over a platter of complementary herbs, rosemary, sage, burnt lemon, and a selection of dips ranging from wine vinegar to something that smells like regret. You try another egg this time, soaked in honeyed ash and fennel seed. It's better, sweeter, still unsettling. A boy dares his friend to eat 3 in a row. He does. Then immediately lies down in the grass and says he can see time backwards. Everyone claps respectfully. Of course there's debate. Some say the tradition was metaphorical, that snake egg was a nickname for certain herbs or mushroom spores. Others argue the ash preservation method existed not for snakes, but for fish eggs or small fruits. But a few brave archaeologists insist the calcified remnants found in apothecary ruins suggest the consumption of something oval ash-covered and very reptilian, was indeed a thing. The wind shifts. The smell of ash and vinegar sharpens. Someone lights a brazier nearby, tossing in dried lavender to cut the funk. A woman plucks a pickled egg from the jar, bites it, and hums softly like she's at peace. You try humming too. It doesn't work. A traveling performer balances 3 eggs on the back of his hand, then flips them once. Twice one falls and cracks on the stone. Everyone gasps. A dog licks it. The dog seems changed. You decide not to ask. Before you leave, the apothecary woman offers you a wrapped bundle. 2 pickled snake eggs, a pinch of smoked salt, and a sprig of dried marjoram. For later, she says, if the night gets noisy. You thank her. You don't ask what that means. You walk away, past the rustling herbs and the fading laughter, sound of chewing, and quiet arguments, but whether these count as real food or philosophical decisions. 3 slippery thoughts uncoil in your mind as the sky begins to darken. If your snack stares back, eat it before it finishes blinking. Pickled anything can taste good eventually. Snake eggs may not tell the future, but they do make the present more interesting. Skewered Quail Hearts. You're standing at the edge of a bustling fairground just beyond the main tent where jesters juggle goats, complain, and someone is trying to sell perfume made from damp hay and overconfidence. The air is a tapestry of smells, spiced wine, wood smoke fried dough, and something darker, richer, vaguely metallic. You follow your nose. There, beside a roaring iron fire pit, a young man in a patchy green doublet flips skewers with practiced flicks of his wrist. They sizzle, drip, and flare up in bursts of flame. On closer inspection, the skewers hold small, dark morsels, tender, neatly arranged, and faintly glistening with glaze. Quail hearts, roasted, skewered, lightly charred, and apparently wildly popular. A girl in line ahead of you claps with excitement as she receives hers wrapped in a piece of warm bread. She bites into one with theatrical joy. Still beating, she jokes. You pretend not to laugh, and definitely pretend not to flinch. Tonight's historical fact: in certain parts of medieval Europe, especially in markets and fairs across Spain, Italy, and southern France, skewered bird organs. Most often, hearts were a prized street food. Quail and pigeon were commonly raised or caught, and nothing went to waste. The heart, being rich, tender, and small, was often seasoned with vinegar, honey, and spice blends before being roasted quickly over open flame and sold to hungry travelers and thrill seekers with a taste for bold textures. You step up to the fire. The vendor gives you a nod and holds up a skewer. 5 hearts perfectly spaced, shimmering with glaze. Cider braised, he says. Bit of clove, touch of honey. They're intimate. You don't know what that means, but it feels honest. You take a bite. It's warm, tender, and slightly chewy. In that way, only hearts can be muscular, determined, flavorful. The honey doesn't overpower, it just softens the edge. There's a faint trace of clove and maybe regret, but good regret. The kind that makes you want another bite. You glance around. Everyone's eating them differently. One boy dips his in mustard, and yells for glory before running off. A couple shares a skewer like it's romantic. A bearded man takes one bite, closes his eyes, and whispers, "My mother was right." Here's your quirky detail. In some fairs, quail hearts were sold as bravery snacks. It was said that to eat the heart of a bird gave you a portion of its spirit, its vigilance, its speed, its occasional tendency to walk directly into walls. Young knights in training would often be dared to eat them whole raw or just seared as a test of courage. Some even tied empty skewers to their belts afterward as proof. One song from the 14th century ends with the line, "He wore 7 hearts and none of them his own." Of course, historians aren't in full agreement. Some believe the romanticism around bird hearts is mostly a later invention, a culinary flourish retrofitted with meaning. Others cite recipe scrolls and fairground inventories that list hearts by the dozen sold alongside kidneys and tongues. Either way, the taste was very real. So was the line. The vendor passes you a second skewer, this one dusted with crushed lavender and wild salt. The dreamy kind, he explains. You'll remember things you forgot. You chew slowly. He may be right. Behind you, a woman plays a slow melody on a stringed instrument shaped like a turtle. People hum along. A small dog jumps up and steals a heart. A child claps. No one is mad. A friendly nun strolls past, takes one skewer, blesses it, and eats 3 hearts before anyone blinks. She's carrying a mug that smells like fortified apple wine. You pretend not to notice. Someone drops a heart. A goose eats it. The goose looks confused, but confident. You make eye contact. It nods. You're not sure how to feel. Now for the wild part, in one border town, it was believed that eating quail hearts during a solar eclipse could grant you clarity of thought for the entire year. One scholar wrote, "The sky darkened. I consumed 5 hearts, and suddenly I understood my taxes." This may or may not have been metaphor. You eat another. The flavor hits harder this time. Earthy, honest. It reminds you of something older than hunger, like memory, made edible. The fire crackles louder as the wind picks up. Sparks dance across the night air. A trio of minstrels sings a song that contains far too many verses about poultry. No one complains. As you finish the last bite, the vendor offers you a small linen pouch. Inside, a single dried quail, heart and a slip of paper that reads, "For later when the world feels too soft." You thank him without quite knowing why. 3 bold thoughts flutter through your mind like wings at dusk. Tiny hearts can hold big flavor and strange metaphors. If your snack is skewered, you're probably making brave choices. Never stare too long into the eyes of a goose who just ate your dinner. Wind-dried frog tongues. You're standing on a narrow wooden footbridge stretched across a slow, greenish stream. Below, frogs croak with the kind of smug energy only creatures that leap for a living can muster. The sun is warm, the breeze smells faintly of wet stone and thyme, and hanging from a dozen strings tied to the bridge rails are small, curled, pale pink strips. They sway gently in the wind, like prayer flags or medieval dental floss. A boy nearby waves at you, points proudly at the line. "Frog tongues," he says. "Dried right here, wind-cured, for chewing knot spells, though some folks still whisper over them." He grins. You are instantly both curious and concerned. Tonight's historical fact, while not a widespread staple, certain isolated folk communities, especially in mountainous or marshy areas of Central and Eastern Europe, were known to harvest frog parts for both culinary and folk medicinal purposes. Dried frog tongues were rarely used for full meals, but appeared as curious local snacks or remedies believed to help with sore throats, bad dreams, and loose thoughts. When wind-dried and seasoned, they were occasionally chewed like medieval jerky or bubble gum with extra consequences. You approach the boys' table. There's a small wooden box with neat rolls of dried frog tongue nestled inside, sprinkled with crushed anise, rosemary, and something he calls blessed salt. You ask if that means it was blessed by a priest. He shakes his head. No, blessed by a woman who's been angry since March. Fair. You pick one up. It's light, papery almost. The texture is soft but chewy, like jerky's shy cousin. You pop it in your mouth and chew slowly. The taste is strange, not unpleasant, just swampy herbal, slightly sour with a whisper of mint. Not minty, mind you, just mint adjacent, like someone once waved a mint leaf near it in passing. There's a faint sweetness, maybe from the drying process, maybe from whatever the frog last licked. A girl sitting nearby dips hers in honey. Too bitter. Otherwise, she says, and offers you a dab. It helps. You now understand why this snack never went global. Here's your quirky detail. In some regions, wind-dried frog tongues were shaped into loops and hung around children's necks to protect them from nightmares or excessive questions. Some families swore by it. Others simply chewed them, like a nervous habit. One legend says, if you chew one while standing barefoot in running water, you'll forget your greatest regret. Another says you'll remember one you never knew you had. The village elder walks by with a pouch full of them, chewing meditatively as he walks. Tastes like memory, he mutters, then keeps walking toward the mill. There's a scholarly divide, of course. Some believe dried frog tongue was medicinal, only meant to be boiled into tea or poultices. Others insist it was truly a snack, an acquired taste, yes, but functional and rich in protein. A few brave linguists even suggest the tongues were used in rituals of silence, where chewing them symbolized absorbing secrets. That part has yet to be peer-reviewed. You try another one this time, coated in crushed juniper and dried fig peel. It's oddly good, chewier. The wind dries it faster than your expectations. A group of children start a contest who can chew theirs the longest without talking. One boy lasts 20 minutes and receives a bracelet made of grass and 2 more tongues as a reward. You can't tell if he's proud or just overwhelmed. Someone walks by wearing a cloak stitched with dried tongues sewn into patterns. It rustles softly. He claims it keeps the bad air out and the good spirits in. You nod respectfully and step slightly to the side. As evening settles, the bridge glows gold in the sinking sun. Frog croaks grow louder. Or maybe you're just more attuned now. The hanging tongues twist in the breeze like little windsocks of history, strange, silent, and undeniably real. You sit down on a nearby rock, nibbling slowly on your 3rd strip. The taste is starting to make sense. Or maybe you've just adjusted. The boy returns and offers you a pouch of mixed flavors, sage lemon wine soaked, and one with a blackened edge he calls the dark one. You decide to save that for another night. 3 surprisingly soft thoughts wiggle through your wind-kissed brain. You've now officially chewed something that once caught flies for a living. If it swings in the wind and smells like rosemary, don't rule it out. Frog tongues might not help with dreams, but they sure make waking life more interesting. Hedgehog broth and midnight bread. You're walking through a narrow mountain trail at twilight, where the air is crisp. The trees whisper, and the rocks underfoot feel like they're judging your posture. Somewhere ahead, a curl of smoke rises from a stone chimney, wedged between 2 mossy boulders. You follow the scent, something woody, rich, and unmistakably herbal. You arrive at a clearing where a pot boils slowly over a fire pit dug straight into the hillside. A group of travelers, boots muddy cloaks, damp eyes glowing with that soft post-supper glaze, sits around the flames, bowls and hands steam rising into the cool night like tiny fragrant ghosts. In the pot, hedgehog broth. Yes, hedgehog. A small woman with big shoulders and flour smudged on her cheeks stirs the pot with the kind of concentration normally reserved for love spells or tax documents. She ladles a portion into a wooden bowl, drops in a slice of toasted dark bread, and hands it to you. Best hot, she says. Before it remembers, it was spiky. Tonight's historical fact in several parts of medieval Europe, particularly in forested or mountainous regions like the Carpathians, the Scottish Highlands, and rural France, hedgehogs were occasionally cooked and eaten, especially in late autumn. Their meat was considered earthy and mild, and when stewed with root vegetables, wild garlic, and crushed juniper berries, it was transformed into a warming dish for cold nights. The Romani communities were especially known for wrapping hedgehogs in clay, baking them whole, then cracking the clay to remove the spines. You sip. The broth is warm complex with hints of thyme smoke and something gamey but polite. The bread soaks up the flavors like it's been training for this moment all day. You chew slowly, wondering if it's possible to feel nostalgic for something you just met. A man beside you dunks his bread 3 times, muttering something about luck. A boy tears his slice into bits and flings them into the fire, saying the hedgehog spirit prefers offerings. No one argues. Here's your quirky detail. Some villagers believed hedgehog broth at midnight could ward off wandering spirits or even help you digest dreams. That's right, not have dreams. Digest them. The logic is unclear, but the tradition was serious. In some households, hedgehog soup was only served on moonless nights, alongside slices of midnight bread, a heavy loaf made with roasted barley-dried mushrooms and nettle seeds. Of course, scholars disagree. Some call the hedgehog eating practice marginal, limited to the poorest or most isolated. Others argue that culinary references combined with hedgehog bones, found in hearth sites, show this dish wasn't uncommon. One monk wrote that it was a meal for silence and second thoughts, which either means it was reflective or mildly unsettling, or both. You're offered a second helping this time with a twist, a spoonful of cider vinegar stirred in just before serving. The flavor sharpens dances. You smile without thinking. The woman with the ladle nods like she's been expecting that. As night settles, fully lanterns are lit, and someone starts singing a low-humming tune about a hedgehog that escaped a stew and became a mountain god. No one corrects them. You lean against a log belly, warm hands wrapped around your empty bowl. The stars peek out between the branches. A fox darts past. You pretend not to notice the small pile of clean hedgehog quills stacked neatly by the fire. Decorative ritualistic toothpicks. You decide not to ask. One of the travelers breaks off a chunk of midnight bread, smears it with broth-soaked mushroom paste, and hands it to you with a wink. This'll keep the cold out. And the regret's in, he says. You chew thoughtfully. He's not wrong. 3 sleepy thoughts curl up inside your mind, like something preparing for hibernation. If your soup ever looks back at you, stir faster. Midnight bread may be heavy, but so are most good decisions. Hedgehog stew tastes like courage wrapped in mystery and time. Ant butter on oat wafers. You're sitting on the sloping edge of a grassy hill where the wind hums low like it's tuning a song only the sheep can hear. Around you, the landscape rolls in waves of gold and gray, scattered with stone huts leaning fences, and something sizzling gently on a flat rock beside a small fire. The rock is hot. The smell is sharp, sweet, and tangy, like citrus, and smoke had an argument and made up in butter. A woman in a thick wool shawl squats beside the fire, scooping a golden paste onto thin oat wafers that look like crunchy prayers. She glances up. "You ever had ant butter?" she asks. You blink. She takes that as a no. It's all about the acid, she says, smearing the mixture with a smooth wooden spatula. And the patience. Tonight's historical fact. In certain parts of early medieval Scandinavia and the Baltic regions, red forest ants were collected not just as a curiosity, but for culinary and medicinal use. Their bodies, rich in formic acid, were crushed and mixed with animal fat cheese curds or oat paste to create what was sometimes referred to as sour butter. It was spread on bread or crackers and consumed both as a flavor enhancer and allegedly to wake the blood. You're handed a wafer. It's still warm. The butter glistens faintly in the breeze. You take a bite. The oat is dry, nutty comforting. Then the ant butter hits. Tart, bright, a little tingly on the tongue, like lemon zest crossed with ambition. There's an aftertaste of pine and adrenaline. You chew carefully, aware that this might be your first snack that's actively judging your reactions from beyond the grave. A boy nearby balances 3 wafers in a stack and bites through them with theatrical flair. For strength, he says. He's 5. Here's your quirky detail. Ant butter was sometimes used as a rite of passage food, not because it was hard to make, but because the gathering of ants required stealth speed and a total disregard for personal comfort. The trick, apparently, was to smoke them out of their mound with burning sage and scoop them with a deer horn spoon. Bonus points if you didn't get bitten. You glance at the bowl. The butter is thick, speckled with tiny red flecks. A young girl is mixing her portion with wild honey. Makes it friendly, she says. You try it. She's right. The sweetness rounds out the acid, and suddenly it tastes like something your body wants, but can't explain why. A visiting merchant leans over and tells you that in his village, ant butter is served with pickled roots and raw fish. Another swears by combining it with mashed apple and black pepper. A third eats it straight off a spoon and hasn't blinked in 5 minutes. Naturally, scholars argue about this. Some insist the ant butter tradition was hyper-local, more folk remedy than food. Others point to scattered recipes in herbal scrolls and winter market inventories that list formica paste sold in small pots wrapped in cloth. One dubious Latin margin note reads simply, "Stings the tongue, sharpens the soul." You're offered a second wafer, this time spread with a thicker blend of ant butter and dried goat cheese. The flavor is richer now, deeper. You chew slower. The air feels clearer. Either the wind changed direction or your blood did. A sheep bleats in the distance. A man with a bagpipe made from something unholy starts to play. No one objects. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face, the wafer soften in your hand, and your senses adjust to the fact that you may now crave insect-based dairy substitutes. The woman by the fire hums as she stirs another batch. We used to call it lightning butter, she says. Wakes you up in places tea can't reach. 3 slightly buzzing thoughts crawl comfortably across your brain. If your snack tingles, it might be working. Butter made from ants is nature's way of keeping chefs humble. When in doubt, spread it thin, unless you're feeling bold. Fermented beetle paste. Spread. You're crouched under a canvas awning in the back corner of a marshland trading post, where the ground squelches just slightly underfoot, and everything smells faintly of damp wood moss and an herb you can't quite name. Rain taps gently on the canvas above, soft as a heartbeat, and beside you, a small clay bowl sits on a stone table, filled with something dark glossy and glistening with questionable intent. Beetle paste. Thick, fermented, speckled with crushed herbs and little flecks of something reddish-brown that probably had legs at some point. A man with muddy boots and the kind of mustache that implies both danger and excellent seasoning leans in and says, "Spread it thin. And don't smell it first." Wise advice. Tonight's historical fact. In some marshland and forest communities, particularly in Slavic and early Finno-Ugric regions, beetles were foraged not just for ritual or medicine, but fermented for consumption. The larger oil-rich beetles were roasted, ground, then mixed with vinegar herbs and mashed root vegetables. The mixture was left to ferment in sealed containers, sometimes for days, sometimes weeks, producing a tangy, protein-dense spread, often served with flatbread root chips or on slices of dried fruit. You're handed a wafer of tree bark, crisp, surprisingly elegant, with a generous smear of the paste. It's pungent, complex. The scent is earthy, like old mushrooms and wet stone. You bite, the taste hits in layers. First sour, then nutty, then a sharp tang like wild garlic had a midlife crisis and joined a band. It's not bad, but it's definitely bold. You chew with care, dignity, and the determination to be open-minded. Next to you, a girl no older than 8 is smearing the paste onto a slice of roasted turnip and eating it like it's jam. "My uncle eats it with pickled pears," she says. "He says it keeps the coughs away and the neighbors quiet." Here's your quirky detail. Fermented beetle paste was sometimes used as both food and protective charm. In some villages, a dollop was placed at the entrance of a home to distract ill will. In others, it was eaten before long journeys, as beetles were seen as creatures who always find a way home. One old recipe adds rosehip and finely ground bone dust for memory and steadiness. You're offered a second cracker, this one paired with smoked mushroom slices and a drizzle of honey. It's smoother. The sweetness tempers the fermentation, and suddenly it tastes like a savory jam your brain hasn't learned to name yet. A man with a lute shaped like a fish begins singing about the Beetle Bride, a local folktale involving transformation, lost bread, and regret. No one listens to the words, but the melody works. You find yourself tapping your toe in time. Naturally, there's scholarly debate. Some argue this fermented paste was not widespread, but rather a local curiosity tied to food scarcity. Others point to old tax records showing jars of swamp spread listed among household stores. One deeply suspicious monk wrote in his journal, "The paste of beetles sour and dark, yet strangely fortifying." That monk lived to 93. You take that as a recommendation. You try another combination beetle paste with pickled walnut and sourberry mash. It's sharp, crunchy, and confusing in the best way. Someone nearby lights a fire. The smoke curls upward, mingling with the rain mist. You feel full, but not heavy. Awake, but not twitchy. A rare state. A good one. You're handed a tiny clay jar, a gift. It contains a thick scoop of the paste and a small wooden spoon carved with what looks like beetle wings. "For when you forget how to be brave," the woman says. You don't ask what she means. You just nod. 3 oddly solid thoughts crawl calmly through your mind, like they found the right marsh to settle in. If your lunch used to click when it walked, show some respect. Fermentation is just magic with extra steps and a smell. Not all spreads belong on toast, but some belong in stories. Sparrow, tongue pies, for diplomats. You're seated in a velvet-draped gallery just outside the banquet hall of a minor but deeply self-important duchy, where the chandeliers drip wax like they're nervous, and the musicians have been playing the same lute melody for what feels like a month. The room smells of cinnamon silk and faintly of roast anxiety. You've been offered a plate. On that plate, a pie. Small, elegant, golden-crusted lattice with braided pastry and barely the size of your palm. Steam curls gently from a crack in the side, releasing an aroma of rosemary clove and something savory, sharp, almost metallic. The steward leans down and whispers sparrow tongue. You pause. Tonight's historical fact. In a few particularly elite and peculiar medieval courts, especially in Eastern Europe and parts of northern Italy, delicacies involving very specific animal parts became diplomatic offerings. One such dish, recorded in select court cookbooks, was sparrow tongue pie, a labor-intensive pastry filled with herbs, fat, and dozens of finely trimmed tongues from sparrows and songbirds. The dish was considered a gesture of both wealth and control, symbolic, luxurious, and impractical enough to impress guests of political significance. You cut into the pie. The crust crackles politely. Inside, a dark aromatic filling, almost jam-like, studded with herbs, and slender, almost translucent slivers of something that might have sung last week. You take a bite. It's rich, soft, oddly silky. The herbs do most of the heavy lifting: sage, anise, marjoram, but the meat itself is delicate, slightly earthy, and ever so slightly unnerving. You chew slowly, hoping no one's watching your eyebrows betray you. At the far end of the hall, two diplomats, one from the hills, one from the Salt Coast, are trading compliments over their second pies. One compliments the spice blend. The other politely mentions the texture. Both are lying beautifully. Here's your quirky detail. Some courts held informal contests over how many tongues could fit in a single pie. The Songbird Supper of 1387, hosted by a Moldavian countess, allegedly included pies with over 300 tongues each, mostly from sparrows, larks, and finches. One guest fainted. Another composed a ballad. The court jester refused to participate and was applauded for his restraint. A young servant passes by with a tray of wine, eyes wide. They say the more tongues you eat, the better you are at keeping secrets, she whispers. Or telling them, depending on the moon. Naturally, historians argue. Some claim the pie was metaphor, a poetic flourish meant to suggest refinement. Others believe it was very real, citing kitchen records, procurement ledgers, and a particularly grumpy inventory note that reads, "Tongues arrived late again." Baker most displeased. You're offered a second pie. This one marked with a rose-shaped pastry seal. It's slightly sweeter, with bits of stewed plum in the filling. You chew with more confidence this time. It helps to pretend the tongues are merely very aggressive mushrooms. Around you, courtiers murmur softly in at least 3 languages discussing trade routes, troop movements, and whether the Duchess's dog should be knighted. You finish your pie. They sip a spiced cordial and try not to wonder how many birds were involved in your snack. The steward returns. If you enjoyed that, he says we also serve swallow brain dumplings on the 3rd feast night. You thank him politely and pretend to be very busy with a napkin. A poet nearby begins to recite a verse, comparing diplomacy to pastry flaky fragile, full of unexpected fillings. It gets a mild applause and one groan. You quietly agree with both. 3 featherlight thoughts flutter across your mind as the last crumb vanishes. Tongues aren't just for talking. Sometimes they're for negotiations. When a pie takes 2 weeks to prepare, it's probably not about the flavor. If your dinner once sang at dawn, chew respectfully and politically. So here we are, friends. 22 strange, savory, and slightly suspicious medieval snacks later. You've walked through mossy forests and smoky kitchens, sat by festival fires, and diplomats' tables chewed on beetle paste and wind-dried frog tongues like it was the most natural thing in the world. And somehow, it was. Because the truth is, people across history weren't so different from us. Hungry, curious, bold in ways that would absolutely ruin a modern dinner party. They turned what they had, feathers, flour, honey, fire, into stories you could bite into. They filled silence with spice. They made joy edible. You didn't just learn what medieval junk food looked like. You tasted what survival sounded like, how ritual met practicality, and how even a sparrow tongue can carry a nation's pride if served on a gold plate with enough fanfare. And you did it calmly, with open eyes, and maybe even an open stomach. So now, as the fire fades and the wind settles against the window pane, I want you to breathe in gently. Let that strange, delicious knowledge sit like something warm in your belly. You made it through the weirdest menu history had to offer. And maybe next time someone offers you something odd, a dish with legs wings or whispering crust, you'll say yes. Not because it's normal, but because now you understand history is always served with a side of surprise. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.